Hi, everybody. I'm Sally Halderson, and I'm Managing Director of Porchlight Book Company. For nearly 40 years, Porchlight has specialized in selling, customizing, and shipping books in bulk to help spread innovative ideas widely and bring positive change to organizations and the people who power them more efficiently and effectively. Before we start the conversation with our special guest, there are two quick anecdotes that I'd like to tell you about. So here's a thing that happens to me not infrequently, and maybe happens to you as well. Our owner and CEO forwards a post to me from Seth's popular blog and writes something like this with variable number of exclamation points. I know some of you will probably have had a similar inbox experience. And that blog post will become a central point of conversation about how Seth's post for that day reflects a problem or reality in our industry, in the marketplace, in society in general, but also how that dynamic he illustrates may play out or be alive in our company. That blog post becomes shorthand for an issue that we've been noodling over, but didn't have the words to define until Seth put it into words. This is how Seth's words inform and improve the work we and thousands of other people who read his work do on a daily basis. Also, and here's, I'm going to take the privilege to say this, my late boss, Jack Covert, who ran our company for 30 years and was an influential presence in business book publishing over that time, was a great fan of Seth. Over the many relationships Jack developed over a long career, there were few stars within the constellation that is the publishing industry that he talked more fondly about than Seth, who he admired more than Seth, not just for his work, but for the generosity of his time and insights. I tell you these stories merely to say something you all already know, that Seth is, as Jack would and did say, the real deal. And his new book, This is Strategy, Make Better Plans, is yet another way that Seth is generous with his intelligence and his unique perspective on what motivates people, what troubles companies, what obstructs progress, what actually gets stuff done. And we are honored that Seth, author of 21 bestsellers with millions of subscribers to that daily blog, has agreed to spend some of his time with us today. Hi, Seth.
I'm all choked up. That was very kind of you, and I miss Jack a lot.
We miss him very much.
But we're changing the name of the company because that little intro video was nice, but come on, it's the Super Duper Book Company because there's nobody. It's not like Porchlight or somebody else. There's just Porchlight, that you touch things and you make them better. And I suggest some harebrained scheme and you say yes. You guys are the best. Just the best, Jerry, the best.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate that. And I appreciate, just your commitment to us. And we should probably get this thing rolling. So everyone who is either enjoying your book or is about to enjoy their book gets a little taste of what's in it. So I've got a lot of questions for you, and we'll also move into some viewer questions that have been submitted prior to the live stream. If any of you viewers want to drop some questions into the chat, we'll see if we can get to those as well. So here we go. This is a Wednesday, right?
I'm in a fugue state. It's publishing week. I have no idea.
It's the day after the release of your new book. This is Strategy, Make Better Plans. Congratulations, first off. And how are you feeling, and how might this release be different than prior books or projects that you've shipped into the world now that you're working with a new publisher at Authors Equity?
There's usually this very unhappy feeling that comes in the days shortly after a book release for two reasons. One, regret of things you didn't do, could have done. And two, the ennui that comes from having a blank space. Just, you were leaning against something and now you can't lean against it. I am feeling neither of those things. I have such fondness for Adrian and Nikki Papadopoulos and the people at Penguin who I worked with for over a decade. But Authors Equity is such a delight. They are a new kind of publisher doing things in a faster, more market-focused way. And it's just been thrilling. Number two, I did 80 podcasts for this launch, and that was exhausting. So I'm glad I don't have to do too many more. And in the conversations, you're talking to someone who just touched your book. So you get a chance over and over and over again to introduce the ideas. And what I found is more than almost anything I've written in a long time, this resonated with people all across the spectrum, talking about how to raise a 3-year-old kid, talking how to build a 3-year-old company, and everything in between. So I never got tired of talking about it because it's different with every person. We each deserve a strategy, and too few of us have one. So I'm feeling really good about my team, about the book, the ideas, and yes, book publishing is struggling and will struggle for the rest of time. But at least this part of it, the water is fine. You can jump in because here we are.
It's an exciting change to the industry. And I think we're going to touch on that quite a bit through this conversation as we talk about strategy and how we can make change and how we can set our own. Let's start a little bit with the practical. This strategy is constructed via 297 riffs, as you call them. That's the definition you give us in the introduction. And you also say that your narrative is recursive and elliptical. Why did you make the stylistic choice when talking about strategy of all things to write the book in this way? It strikes me as similar to listening to jazz versus listening to pop music with a melody and with lyrics. So tell me if I'm right about that and why you made this choice.
Maybe not pop music, maybe a classical piece from the 1700s
Okay.
with a more rigid structure. So I've been a teacher since 1977 when I was 17 years old. Pedagogy and game design are the two things that wake me up. Pedagogy is the science and understanding of learning. Nobody learns important things from structure. We remember them with structure, but that's not how we learn them. So you don't learn all of biology and then learn chemistry. That you have to understand a little chemistry to understand a little biology and vice versa. That you don't learn all the vegetables in one day when you're 3 years old. You know, broccoli came later. So what I found, because I am trying to teach people something they think they understand but do not, is I had to talk about systems, but I had to talk about games, and then I had to go back and talk about empathy, and then I had to talk about time. And if I had to break them into sections, each section was failing because I couldn't talk about what it was dependent on because of the structure. There isn't a ground up way to think about strategy. They're all mixed together. And therefore, I resisted the entreaties of a few of my well-meaning early readers and said, no, I'm going to teach this the way I learned it and the way I've seen other people learn it. And I'm not trying to pull a stunt here. I really think this is the most effective way to understand. And I would take Miles Davis over Beethoven most days.
It reminds me, as you were describing that, a little bit of moving through a labyrinth or some game like that, where you're bumping into not necessarily dead ends, but like learning waypoints.
Yeah.
And then you have to back out and then move forward, changing your direction until you're sort of absorbing each experience that you hit during those dead ends or waypoints until you get to where you're going.
Exactly. So there's a good moment to mention this. The strategy deck, the only place you can buy it is at Porchlight, and it's $79, slightly higher in Canada. What I did was I took 200, or I think that's the math, of the ideas, and I juxtaposed them onto cards, and you play 4 of them. And when you put the 4 next to each other, it will spark a new idea.
Right.
So you get to work with your team, parts of your team who don't like reading books, and say, let's compare this to this, and what are we going to do about that? And the people who have touched the deck have been really, you guys already ordered a whole new batch of them. It's a pretty cool thing.
One of the things that you say at the beginning of the book is not only giving people suggestions of how to read the book, where you can jump around, you can read it fulsomely, you can sort of use it the way you need to use it, but you also suggest that people get a group together, that people get a strategy club, and whether you're working through the cards or you're reading the book or you're talking about how to apply it, that really this isn't a book just for a person, but it's a book for a community, for a culture, for whatever group it is that you want to work with.
Yeah. So it's well known how much I hate cocktail parties, almost as much as I hate galas. But most years I go to the Porchlight cocktail party.
Yeah.
And the reason is you are generous enough to connect people like me to each other, and we never get to see each other other than that. Having a culture that talks to itself reinforces forward motion. And the only reason there's a book is it was the best excuse I could think of to get people to talk to each other. We did a meetup yesterday Tuesday in over 100 cities. More than 1,000 people met up in Qatar. 4 people were there. In Portland, Oregon, 30 people came, and they talked to each other through these prompts. That I could stop right there. That's what I set out to do, and it worked. That's you need to talk about this. It will get better if you talk about it.
So in the book, you write, a strategy is a set of choices we make and stick with as we seek to compete. It's easier to have a meeting about our mission statement than it is to get serious about choosing and persisting with a strategy. Why do we avoid getting serious about choosing and persisting with a strategy? And how will this book light a fire up? All those people who were at the meetup and all the people who are going to read it, how are they going to get inspired to get past the mission statement and into the strategy?
That's a great question. And just to foreshadow, if anyone's got questions as we're going, put them in the comments. We'd love to see them. So the worst meeting any company has is about their logo. Because everyone is an expert on logos. Everyone has an opinion about a logo. And therefore nothing useful happens in the meeting. I don't like it. I like it. Yeah. And a mission statement is very similar. So a mission statement gets compromised and watered down until it could become the mission statement for any organization. If you try to do that with a strategy, it will fail. A strategy is hard decisions about an unknowable future. People in organizations hate hard decisions, and they don't like things that are unknowable because they can't manage their way out of it. Right. So the best strategies come from one person or a tiny group of people. Starbucks had a great strategy. Microsoft, Nike, Apple. Go down a list of a company that's thriving, or an organization, Acumen, Alcoholics Anonymous. I can tell you what their strategy is. They might not be able to tell you, but I know what it is. And it's hard to stick with because you end up compromising, right? I'm sure someone at Patagonia said, if we just had a cheaper line, we could get people to not buy the Columbia stuff. Right. And if you don't know your strategy, you'll say, oh, sure, we could make some money next week doing that. Let's try it. So being clear and crisp about the change you seek to make and who you're making it for, do that and then tell everyone your strategy. Don't ask them.
So let's talk a little bit about strategy in the sense of if you ask people what is strategy, and of course your book is titled This is Strategy, so we're going to get to that. Most people would answer that strategy is a plan. And I think most people recognize that strategy is often something that's sort of behind the scenes and it determines and drives action, but they also might think of those sort of traditional business strategy tools like a SWOT analysis or a balanced scorecard. So that, again, the title of your book is This is Strategy, Make Better Plans. So how does your more philosophical approach, strategy is a philosophy of becoming, you say, differ from how we strategically think about strategic planning?
The subtitle Make Better Plans doesn't mean a strategy is a plan. It means a strategy is the act of making a better plan.
Okay.
A plan is guarantee. It's tactics. If you do this, you'll get that, right? A plan can be managed to. So Roger Martin has famously said, strategic planning is an oxymoron. because you can't plan and have a strategy. They're the different things. You can't do them at the same time. Strategy is we're going to make some assertions about how the world is and how the world is going to be. And we're going to describe some plans that can dance with our assertions, but the world probably won't turn out exactly that way. So when it doesn't, what is our backbone that will help us make a better plan? So it's not a list of plans. So the kinds of tools you described, they're fine. And I didn't put them in the book because you can look them up.
Yep.
What I'm trying to say to people is you skipped over this part and you said, I just got to get back to work. And I'm saying it doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're going in the wrong direction. That if I talk to 5 different people at most big or small companies and I said, what's your strategy? They would describe what's their job. And a strategy is the fuel for how are we going to come up with the plans and the tactics to get us to what we sought to do. And that, we're in the book business, so let's talk about that. What was Barnes & Noble's strategy versus Amazon's strategy 25 years ago? Interestingly, Walmart, which has some of the smartest strategy people around, I got hired to give a speech there in the year 2000. That was 24 years ago. I show up for their digital division. It's 250 people in an auditorium in Bentonville, Arkansas. The only hotel in town didn't have my reservation, so I slept on the floor of somebody else's room. And I walk in and there's a giant banner across the ceiling and it says, you can't out Amazon Amazon. 25 years ago, Walmart gave up and said, we understand what Amazon's strategy is. And if we try to do that, we could beat them, but we will destroy our business in the meantime. So they were smart enough to see it. What was Barnes & Noble's strategy? Holding their breath. That didn't work, right? And that's because they didn't want to confront the changes that were happening in the world. They wanted them to go away. And what we need to do if we're going to have a strategy, a philosophy of becoming, is embrace constraints and acknowledge the change agents, not insist that the constraints will go away if we try hard enough and that the change agents aren't real.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of denial when we think we have maybe the moral high ground as opposed to actually assessing what is happening in the real world. And I never remember who said it, but I love talking about constraints. And there was I think an architect who is well known for talking about constraints, and that he was more challenged by building a beautiful building within a square block than being given an expanse of unlimited space in order to build.
Yeah, that's why Brasilia is one of the worst cities in the world. Forgive me if you live in Brasilia, but they had unlimited land and unlimited money, and they didn't build something particularly attractive because they had no constraints. Constraints are not a problem. Constraints are the point.
So you mentioned this already, but I want to give people I hesitate to say framework because you've already mentioned that a framework was not what you were aiming for with this book, but you talk about 4 threads, the 4 threads of strategy and how they, when intertwined, sort of work to undergird strategy and then also undergird this book if someone is looking for some continuity. Time, games, empathy, and systems. And time is, I think that's probably the one that we understand the most, that strategy plays out over time. Games, you define as keeping in mind that there are multiple players and many different possible outcomes. There's no controlling all of that, but we're playing with those pieces. Empathy, people don't see what you see or even want what you want. And systems. I have sort of 2 definitions here. When we work together, a system is created, but also systems exist everywhere, and you have to see them to change them. So can you tell us about the interplay between these four and how they are essential to the making of better plans?
Okay, so I'm going to use the book industry again because we both understand the book industry. Starting with this time. How'd the book launch go? Doesn't matter. Did you make the Times list this week? Doesn't matter, because you don't write a book for it to succeed in a week. You write a book so that 10 years from now, someone says, I read your book 5 years ago and it changed everything. So the purpose of launch week is not to sell as many books as you can. The purpose of launch week is to plant the seeds so that 4 weeks after launch week, other good things start to happen. So time is something we understand but don't really, because we can't see it and it keeps moving. Empathy says there's a way to think about kindness when we think about empathy, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the harsh reality that you're not in charge, that other people have a choice. That bookstore doesn't have to carry your book. That person doesn't have to buy your book. That podcast doesn't have to feature you as a guest, unless you create the conditions for them to want that, because they will do what they want to do, whether or not you want them to do it. The third one is games. Games are any situation with multiple players, rules, and outcomes. Well, the book industry has so many magical games and rules. The biggest one before Amazon was you can't put a book on the shelf of a bookstore unless you take another book off. And think about that, right? So if a store is going to carry 10 copies of Harry Potter or 10 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird, what 10 books went out the door? Because that's a game, right? Based on scarcity.
Yeah.
And the last one are systems. And as you pointed out, a system has to exist if people are going to interact. So Visa isn't a bank. Visa is a system that permits a stranger to walk into a store or call a number, 800 CEO read, and buy something. If the system didn't exist, we couldn't do that. We built the system so it could happen. Yeah. But once systems get started, they evolve to defend themselves. So for example, in the United States, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a treatment system. Yep. And if you go into the system hoping to get health, you will be disappointed because they are organized to give you treatment. Every person in the system means well, pretty much, but they're all constrained by all the people around them the same way you can't pay your Visa bill with a banana because the system says, no, we will only accept these kinds of currencies. So when we think about how do you have a strategy for a book, in my case, I'm so lucky that I've got a few thousand true fans in the world. And I said to them, let's make this special thing with the strategy deck and the collectible chocolate bar.
Yep.
I confess I've eaten the entire one just since yesterday, and 7 copies of the book. 7? What are you going to do with 7? You can only read 1. Yeah, you can give 6 away.
Yep.
And so now I got 1,000 people in the world, because sold out in 38 hours, who have 6 copies of the book they're eager to give to someone else. That's why I wrote it, not to sell it, to have them give it to someone else. And so, you know, when I did this book all those years ago, I put it in a milk carton, and I was kicked out of the book publishing industry just before I did this. I had no publisher. I published this myself. And there were only 10,000 milk cartons in the whole world. But that planted the seeds so that ultimately 1 million copies of a book go into the world. That's strategy. That's not a tactic. The gimmick is the milk carton, but that's not the point, right? The point is, do you have seeds you want to plant? Is there fertile ground to plant them in? Does the system provide sun, shine, and water? And when is harvest? And thinking through that, it affects everything from what nursery school do you send your kid to how you're going to publish your book. That was a rant, by the way.
It is exactly what we need, because I think it also opens us up to understanding how this book goes beyond just like planning your next hire, right? There's and trying to strategize a certain change to your business model. It goes beyond that, and we will definitely come back to that. But I want to stick on chocolate for a minute. So I have wandered back to our warehouse, and looked for an open bar of chocolate back there. So it is enticing just knowing that that's part of this offer. But since it's Halloween, it seems like a really good time to also talk about chocolate and how the chocolate industry is proof of change that starts with first seeing and then changing a system, one of those four threads. So would you tell us, this is sort of a two-part question. I have a follow-up question, but riff 26 in the book is seeing and changing the chocolate system. So can you tell us a little bit what's in that riff and why it's important?
So this is a buzzkill, and I'm proud to share it because I'm not going to apologize. The chocolate industry is multi-billion dollars. It employs an enormous number of extremely poor people, many of them children, who get paid $2 or $3 a day to plant and harvest cacao. And there are some giant chocolate companies like Hershey's and Nestle's and others who want chocolate to be a commodity, largely tasteless, always the same. And they have pushed farmers to plant a certain kind of higher yielding, lower quality tree and to grow cacao in a certain way so they can pay them as little as possible. And I don't think it's an accident that most of those farms are in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, traditionally oppressed countries because of colonialism. And this is why you should not buy cheap chocolate. The system that invented the little snack pack of Three Musketeers is old and created a culture to defend itself, which is kids expect a certain thing. Parents who are looking for a certain kind of status can't say, I'm not giving anything out, all the way up the food chain. Everyone in the chain feels like they're doing their job, but the end result is kids who are 5 years old have to work in slave labor conditions. So with that buzzkill stated, my friend Sean Askinosie saw what was going on. He used to be a lawyer working with people who had done some bad things, and he wanted to reinvent his career. He decided to build a chocolate company, not to compete with Three Musketeers bars, but to show how chocolate could be grown, how cacao could be traded, how it could taste. Sean has made 54 trips to Tanzania, the Philippines, Ecuador, other countries. When he goes, he brings high school students with him to show them the whole process. He pays the farmers 5 times the going rate. It goes on, the way he is modeling this. He had the second bean to bar chocolate company in the US. Now there's hundreds of them. Oh. And he helped establish a standard and a system for how we should think about this thing that we never thought about before. And so when I had the chance to work with him, and I'm just a volunteer in this thing, but this bar, which comes with a collectible trading card inside and all sorts of bonuses and this little, so this thing, there aren't very many of them, is easier for me to talk about and give to someone than a book. And so I did it in conjunction with the book, but I'm trying to make a point. And so with Halloween about a week away, if you've already bought your cheap chocolate, I'm sorry, please don't do it again. And over time, people like Tony and Sean are going to change the way people think about this, and the system will respond.
The second part of this same riff, you write, and yet culture is the driver of most systems, and culture is the result of the interactions between and among people. Strategies stumble when they depend on someone with power dictating how things will occur. If you want to grow a garden, you'll need to plant seeds, but it's the ecosystem and the climate that will determine what happens after that. Right. So can we talk a little bit about culture as being what sustains either a current system that needs tweaking or changing, or it needs to be built to sustain the change that you wish to make?
Yes. So the culture in many parts of the world in the 1910s and 20s is that important ideas showed up in a book. And the culture in 2024 is that many times books are where ideas go to die. And if you want to have this medium, this idea that you pick an idea, pay for it, have this artifact, share it, to thrive, you can't just show up and pretend it's 1914, because it's not. And so we have to build small little gardens that create tension and affiliation and status, Because if people in this circle, if I'm talking to a creative and I mention the war of art and they don't know what the war of art is, they justifiably feel stupid, because everyone who's a creative knows what that is.
Right.
People who aren't creatives have no idea what it is. So it's an insider-outsider situation. And book publishing is a beautiful example of how we can have little silos of culture where the book is the transcript and the book is the scripture for that culture. And you can change them, but you can't change everyone. And trying to change everyone is a fool's errand.
There also seems to be within, we can talk about niche, we can talk about passion that drives us to follow a more authentic path in what we're trying to pursue. We can talk about sort of competition between those silos, whether it's, I'm sure, in chocolate or whether it's in book publishing, but that there needs to be not just scaffolding, but there needs to be momentum and buy-in and all of that kind of people power. And we learn more about that in the book as well. And what you launch, when you launch it, when it can take, when it gets traction, all of that. So I am going to jump further into the book and go to Riff 122. And this gives people an idea of how you can use the book and how you can interact with it.
Exactly.
We did have a viewer question, a pre-purchase question that was, how does this book apply to everyday life? And I'd like to prelude your answer a little bit by talking about agency. And in Riff 122, who's in charge, you asked the question, why are we on social media if it makes us unhappy? And why are we exhausted by the modern news landscape? If it's not helping us, why do it? And then you equate the question of agency to peer pressure, the flu virus, and chickens laying eggs. You then write, but we have a chance to articulate a strategy to choose agency instead of chickenhood. We're not here to lay eggs to please the system. This is a great example to me on how this book applies to everyday life. And because strategy begets agency. Would you agree with that interpretation and why this book has wide applicability?
I gotta tell you, it makes me so happy to talk to a smart person who's read the book the way I wrote it. Thank you for that, Sally. I know you have so many other things you could be spending your time on.
It's my pleasure, of course.
Really important to me. So one of the riffs is that a chicken is just an egg's way of making another egg. And what that means is that
Think about that one. Yeah.
The purpose of an egg is to have grandchildren, that is what evolution does. And so the chicken is just a medium it uses to create the conditions for the next egg to arrive. One of the examples that really resonates with people is, how much should you spend on a wedding? And the answer is exactly as much as your best friend, but a little more. And that's why a wedding in New York costs $100,000. Not because it's a better wedding by whatever measure of better you want, but that's because the system that we are in, our cultural circle, has determined that people like us spend money like this. And in the riff you're talking about, I start by talking about a parent who's really stressed because in their culture, their 13th birthday is a big deal. And they're under all this social pressure to spend $50,000 they don't have to invite 150 kids who aren't friends with the 13-year-old, and it's going to be traumatic and unhappy. So why do it? Well, because the short-term trauma and happiness is overweighed by the status and affiliation that the culture has insisted you have to care about. And my argument is, we are not simply chickens being told what to do by the egg. We are individuals with agency. And we can't fix a system all by ourselves, but we can make choices that might not benefit us in the short run, but that ultimately not only help change the system, but give us status and affiliation. So 4 years ago, I stopped flying. I haven't been on a plane for work in 4 years. That cost me a lot of money, but I haven't regretted it one day. And there are plenty of conferences that are now shifting how they do business because people like me, not just me, but people like me want to show up from my studio instead, right? That the idea of a book tour starts to fade away when authors say, nah, I'll do something else instead.
Yeah.
Individuals don't have unlimited power, but we have more power than we think we do. And so, yeah, if you've got a shy 13-year-old, why not just say to all of your many friends who are giving you peer pressure, yeah, we're just going to do it on the beach and there's only going to be 8 of us.
Right.
And it will be uncomfortable for 10 minutes and then you can go back to living your life. You don't have to succumb to the biggest, most expensive parts of peer pressure every day. And you will still be able to maintain your status, your affiliation. You'll still be able to make a difference happen. By tweaking the edges, the system begins to change.
Your example of the wedding and spending a little bit more than your best friend did, it reminded me of being an author, right? And
Right.
authors who want what another author had, but a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that, of course, drives the business that we all do. But at the same time, I think you're very good at, as we've already seen a bit and talked about a bit, you're a good example of how you can create a different strategy than just hitting the bestseller list in the first week. You can create a long-lasting strategy that drives interest over time and brings people together, which creates more interest.
Yeah.
But being deliberate about it is what matters, and not wanting what someone else has, but figuring out what it is that you actually want.
Right. But agency is, it's a double-edged sword. So this is here for me as a warning. This was the sequel to Purple Cow. There's a book inside.
Yeah.
This is a brilliant piece of marketing swag. And Will Weiser, bless his heart, succumbed and let me do this. So we shipped, 15,000 of these to Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble instructed its sales force, its store force, when they arrived to open each one, take the book out and throw the box in the garbage. Because
I've never heard that.
The system does things to defend itself, right? And Barnes & Noble doesn't want to sell any book. They want to sell every book. And so there's a process, there's a system. So, people like me show up and we do things that are brave, like firing the New York Times. I don't want to be on the list. I don't pay attention to the list. That frees me to plant seeds, right? But at the same time, you got to be able to say this might not work. Because if you're not comfortable saying this might not work, you can't innovate.
Well, that leads me perfectly to another question, which is how do strategy and freedom cooperate? Because I think sometimes we think strategy is constraining, as we've said, or limiting, or once you set a strategy, you can't change it. But in actuality, it cooperates quite well with freedom.
Yeah. So if there's a storm and you're at LaGuardia Airport and you really need to be in Milwaukee tomorrow, yelling at every single person in the airport is not going to get you there.
Yeah.
That saying, I have rights, I have the freedom to be at my meeting, it's so important, will not get you there. What might get you there is doing a little bit of calculation and realizing you could rent at the Avis counter and drive there all night and you'll get there, right? But you could do that because we have an interstate highway system and a rental car system, both standing there waiting for you to trade your Visa card for a car. And when we see a system and dance with it, we actually have more freedom than if we just insist that the system do exactly what we want.
Right. That's really fascinating. And it feels like sort of the, don't bang your head against a brick wall, move along the wall and it'll get you somewhere.
Yeah.
And you have choices when that happens. So we are going to jump to riff number 196. Okay. I haven't asked you this yet, but do you know all your riff?
No, I don't.
I
was very cleverly looking in the book when you weren't paying attention.
Well, this one this is going to bring some pieces together that we've already talked about, but we see systems when they are forced to change.
Yep.
And we've been talking through this conversation. I've talked in the past about the publishing industry, and as a retailer, Porchlight has definitely been changed by how the publishing industry has been forced to change. And you've always been part of, as we've been looking at the various gimmicks, as you said, necessarily, or just strategies. You've always been part of that push to change publishing, whether it's through those unusual promotions like cereal boxes, milk cartons, music albums, or self-publishing. But here you write, it's easier to see a system when it stops functioning as it did. So this is like after the change, not causing the change. And when a system stops functioning as it did, it behooves us to change, how might this forced change, sorry, I lost myself there as I was thinking about all the things. How might this forced change that stems from a change in the system, like our company was forced to change because an industry changed and we are fast following that change. How might this forced change also apply to the great change agent of our era, technology, and of future generations, AI?
Yeah.
That was a long way to get there.
No, it was a great. So let's just bracket this a little bit. So what we're saying is this: invisible systems are persistent and invisible. The Earth rotates around the sun because of gravity. But if gravity went away, because say the sun disappeared momentarily, we would all notice it immediately, because the Earth would hurtle in a different direction and people would like float off. You would get the idea. It's like a movie. So that when that happens, when a system changes and it can't stop changing, that's called a change agent. Something from the outside showed up and shifted things. So online learning, Khan Academy, is a change agent. That means that MIT can't keep its monopoly on learning quantum mechanics. Right. So they have to make all their courses online for free, which starts to change all these other pieces of the ecosystem. And suddenly you understand what was it that universities used to sell, and now they have to sell a different thing, right? Well, the book industry has had multiple change agents in the 40 years I've been in it, particularly the last 25. And the two biggest ones are, one, when a book is digital, it doesn't take up any space, and you can make it much, 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 much cheaper per copy. And two, a bookstore evolved over 500 years to be exactly the right size. That a bookstore that was too big went out of business. A bookstore that was too small went out of business. You can't have a bookstore that only sells 4 books. You can't have a bookstore that holds 4 million books. There's just the right size. And the book publishing industry organized everything around what's the right size for a book and the right size for a bookstore. And then all of a sudden, we have digital books and we have a bookstore that sells real books, and they have no limitation on shelf space. Those two things mean, not even mentioning all the other ways people can get information, not even mentioning all the ways people can share ideas that were new. Those two things undermine everything that New York book publishers stand for, right? If you pick up any book in your office or at home and show me where the phone number of the publisher is, you can't call them because they don't want to hear from you. You're not the customer. The bookstore is the customer. Everything they do is organized around getting shelf space and kicking somebody else off the shelf. Well, shelf space doesn't matter anymore. So just to put some numbers on this, 10 years ago, a book from an author who sold like I sell would have 20,000 books distributed in the first week. That's called the laydown, 20,000 books in just to fill the system. Now, not just me, everybody, it's 150. It went down not by a factor of 10, but more than that, by a lot more than that. So everything you based everything on just went away. Now I understand, we say. Now I can see what book publishing used to do. It used to be, oh, of course they do that. But there was never an obvious reason, but now we see the reason, because they were filling bookstores. So in the face of that, Penguin and Simon & Schuster and the rest need a new strategy. Well, the MBAs in Germany decided the strategy would be buy all the other book publishers. Yep. This was not a useful approach. The right strategy would have been, if they had thought it through, let's organize the world's information. And you only needed 2 people to start Google, so it should have been Random House, right? Or Simon and Schuster. 2 people started Google. It could have been a New York book publisher, because could have been their strategy. We're going to organize the world's information. It's what we've been doing forever. But instead, they said, we're going to defend dead trees and independent bookstores. And I love the people in the book industry. I love the publishers and the bookstore owners, but we can't keep laboring under the delusion that it hasn't changed, because it has.
Mm-hmm. It feels like and COVID threw that learning off a little bit, and re-justified the investment in trees and space. And so we're trying to react again to something that maybe we were on track to learning prior to that. So it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few pre-sale questions here from the people who have already purchased your book.
Terrific.
And we're going to get through these so that even if they couldn't make this live stream, they will be able to, we're going to clip this all out, and everyone's going to be able to get access to all of the wise things that you've been sharing with us today. But I have some very specific questions. And this one is, Seth, as someone who leads a team focused on delivering high quality brand activation projects within strict timelines, I often find that the urgency of execution can sometimes overshadow long-term strategic thinking, which is the great part of that question, right? Is how do you recommend balancing the urgency of execution with long-term strategic thinking?
Okay, so the key word for me was quality. We don't understand what quality means. We use the word wrong all the time. All quality means is meeting spec. It doesn't mean perfect, and it doesn't mean luxury. It just means meeting spec. If you're not happy with the spec, change the spec. Once you meet the spec, ship the work. When you run out of time, you run out of money, ship the work. So there are constraints here. Time, money, quality spec. Those are your constraints. We're not going to be able to change any of them. So if you can't envision doing the work within the constraints, don't take the project. If you do take the project, now the question is, what's the hard part? And I don't think the hard part is the last 2 days when you're staying up late all night, racing to do something. I think the hard part is bravely and insightfully speaking on day 1 about your strategy. Because if you do that part right, then you can skip a lot of the. So I'll give you a very specific example that I haven't told in a long time. So before there was AOL, there was Prodigy. And I built the most popular online game in the world for Prodigy. That was a very long time ago. And I did this other thing, which was a murder mystery. And there were 30 installments, 30 days. You would get a little bit of an excerpt and a picture. And on the 15th and the 25th day, you got to make a choice. Should the detective go left or should they go right? And the thesis of the person who invented it was, whoever got the most votes, that's the path we would go down, and no one would see the other stuff. And in the first few episodes we did, the first few months, the vote was always close to 50-50. Because it was like, there was no insight in how you should pick one or the other. It was just, what's your preference? So I said to Hal, why don't we just pick whatever one we're going to send them on and ignore the vote? Because it's still delivering exactly what people need to feel. Half the people are still going to be feeling like we picked theirs. And we will have to build half as much stuff.
Right.
So we can put our effort, the budget we have, the time we have, to make the stuff we're building even better. And you can say, well, that's inauthentic, that's lying. No, it's magic. It's storytelling. That's what they do. I promise you, Steven Spielberg doesn't hire actual aliens. Those are actors involved. And so the point is, this person who's doing high quality brand activations, you need to find shortcuts that leave out the stuff that no one cares about, so you can meet the spec that people do care about, because the constraints are your friend.
Thank you. That was a great quality answer to that question about quality. Many of your readers and fans are entrepreneurs, small business owners, strivers, people who work and even often thrive in the gig economy, depending on who they are. So one reader requested advice for solo creators.
Right.
So we've talked a little bit about how it can apply to life. How can it apply to the solo creator?
So the danger of being a solo creator is that you will race to the bottom. If your motto is you can pick anyone and I'm anyone, you got troubles. If you're on Fiverr, Upwork saying you need a book cover design, here I am. I'm a little cheaper and more convenient than everybody else. You're going to get the clients that want someone who's cheaper and more convenient than everyone else. And the minute someone else is cheaper or more convenient than you, they're going to switch. Race to the bottom. You can't work more hours. And you can't hire junior versions of you. So how are you going to move up and get the respect and appreciation you deserve? The only one way is to get better clients. And the way you get better clients is not by getting bad clients and doing a good job for them. You get better clients by becoming the kind of creator that great clients want to hire. And great clients talk about you more, pay more, demand more. And there's a certain kind of person that they are drawn to. It's so tempting when times are slow to take a bad client because otherwise you're going to do nothing. But that's not how you get great clients. You get great clients by creating the conditions for great clients to see their status go up, their peace of mind to go up because they hired the kind of creator that great clients hire.
Excellent. This one might be a little narrow in focus, but I think in scope, but I think it's worth talking about whether there is a different approach to strategy for different industries in terms of applying this learning within the book. And this particular person is asking about the nonprofit sector, but that being very much different than the industries that most people are looking at strategy for.
It's not even by industry. It's within subsets of subsets of subsets of industries. So Acumen, which is a nonprofit I've worked with for 25 years, their unstated motto is, this is a complicated strategy for smart people. They would never say that out loud. But if you say to them, please explain what you do with one image while I stand on one foot, their correct response is, I'm sorry, there's another organization down the street that can do that for you. So their strategy is very different than Scott Harrison's strategy at Charity Water, which is very different than Ettore Rossetti's strategy at Save the Children, right? Save the Children needs to raise $3 million every single day. Wow. And they do it $20 at a time. So their strategy is going to be super different. So we come back to who's it for? What's it for? What's the change you seek to make? As a nonprofit, who's focusing on serving donors and who's focusing on serving the people who need your help? And what are the conditions you're creating to help them? If I'm trying to get indigent tuberculosis patients to take their meds, I'm going to have a totally different strategy than if I'm trying to get upper income people to come to the opera. And what we do to serve people is, yes, stereotype them, make an assertion about what people like this might want and offer that.
So this one is, how can this book speak to new college graduates? And I'm going to also say anyone with a mid-career change or anything like that, trying to create a strategy for themselves to better position themselves to land that first job or that next job.
So what do we make, right? We don't dig ditches anymore. We don't bend steel. What do we make? We make decisions. And the problem, so many problems you have when you're 24 years old, I apologize on behalf of all the generations before you for what we've done to the earth. But you have other problems. And one of them is, for 20 years in school, every time they ask you a question, they already know the answer. So you've been trained, indoctrinated into guessing what the teacher already knows. That's not going to help you get the job that you need. You need to make a decision now about What are you offering and what are you not offering? Are you choosing to fit in all the way so
Mhm.
that the AI system that's screening resumes picks you out of a pile of 5,000 and you win the lottery? Or are you trying to stand out all the way to be seen by an organization that has agency as the one and only person they could ever imagine hiring? Those are two totally different ways to approach the market.
Mhm.
And you need to make a decision. I can't make it for you, but what I'm trying to point out is you need to make a decision.
And our final pre-sale question is, you mentioned early on in our conversation about how you've been talking to people about so many things about this book, and one of them was how to raise a 3-year-old. And so this person is asking, what parent strategies would you use today raising kids now, knowing what you know?
I'm not an award-winning parent. I am a proud father of two extraordinary humans, but I never talk about them or their life. But what I
Mhm.
will say is this. Once you have made it so that your child is going to be safe, everything else you're doing is to plant the seeds for them to be well adjusted and engaged when they're 25, not to solve the problem they are having right this minute
Mm.
when they are 4. And so it may be that solving the 4-year-old's problem is exactly what you should do, but it might be that it's not. That creating the conditions for them to solve the problem might go a long way. Sometimes we have to hold a kid, pick them up off the ground and give them a hug. And other times we have to be generous enough to create the conditions of apparent risk so that they can figure it out. Don't steal the revelation. When people find the revelation, that's when they grow.
Thank you. That's a wonderful piece of advice, and I think very much a part of the sort of culture around parenting that we are all sort of experiencing right now. Okay, so we have filled our time, which I was confident that we might do. I do have one last riff I'd like to touch on to close our conversation.
Please do, Sally.
So
This has been so fun.
this is riff 237, understanding statistics and polls. Which, sidebar, if you're an election poll watcher, you might want to read this riff. You write, strategy involves the hard work of looking at probabilities and building likely outcomes into your plans. It might not be in our control, but we can still count the cards.
Right.
This to me is a strong argument for why this book is a must read right now. And the final viewer question we also had was, why is this book important right now? So, what would you tell everyone who has purchased the book, who has their 7 copies and they're going to share their 6, they're going to reach out to their friend group or their work group to set up a strategy, to work through the cards, to share some chocolate? Why is this book important right now?
Okay, so the first aside I have to answer because you mentioned it.
Mm.
You should ignore the polls.
Yeah.
Cory Doctorow's work on analyzing how polling is done, every 15 to 20 years, the pollsters are so stunned because of the change agents in the system. They reinvent all of the shortcuts that they take to make a poll work. This is going to be one of those times. It doesn't mean one person or the other is actually ahead. I have no idea.
Right.
I just know you should ignore them.
Yeah.
With that said, the idea of probability is that there's a deck of cards. And if that college student who's looking for a job says, I am organizing my life and I'm going to pull out the ace of spades from the deck, they should acknowledge that there's only a 1 in 52 chance that that's going to happen and not beat themselves up if they get the king of clubs, because there's only a 1 in 52 chance. We know how many cards are in the deck. On the other hand, if you're working on something that has to work more often than that, maybe you should be saying, we're counting on a club coming out of the deck, or an even number coming out of the deck. You can keep changing your assertion based on your assumption about what's in the cards. What is a mistake is to imagine that you deserve a miracle, because everyone does, but doesn't change what's in the deck. And so The reason I think this book is timely is that people are realizing if they survived COVID, if they survived the trauma of the last bunch of years, if they have found enough solace about the climate that they're ready to make a difference, people are realizing we have more agency and more leverage than any humans who have ever lived in history. That there's a $1 trillion AI mechanism that you can have for $20 a month, that you can reach 5 billion people on Earth with some sort of electronic communication if they want to hear from you. You can find freelancers and experts anywhere. What are you going to do now? So the subtitle of the book, if I was going to give it a new subtitle, though I don't want to change the old one, is What Should We Do Now?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the book answers. It actually doesn't. That's what the book asks. What should we do now?
Yeah. Well, we have This is Strategy, currently subtitled Make Better Plans. But the subtitle might be In the Eye of the Beholder, the eye of the reader, the mind of the reader, right? And I just want to thank you so much for spending time with us and for all of your insight and intelligence and just motivation to look at things from a slightly different pair of eyeglasses. Yep.
Sally, I just want to say it's people like you, and you in particular, that keeps me in this industry. This industry is about people, and you are a special one.
It is. We got to keep books human, don't we? Even with all of the technology. Okay.
Yes,
all right. So thank you everyone for joining us. And hopefully you enjoyed the live stream. And if you didn't get in on watching it now, you're going to be watching it soon. And you're going to be sharing this with all of your friends.
There's a ruckus.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Sally.